Okay, part 2 of the Life Without Principle annotation on page 167. Yesterday I had posed the question, what within our current society would be considered trivial that would correspond with what Thoreau refers to as here as the macadamizing of the mind, the profaning of the mind. If you remember that the root word fane means temple. So what he's suggesting here is that all of these trivial facts, quote unquote, that we are bombarding ourselves with are actually serving to desecrate the mind more than reconsecrate, which may be considered kind of ironic when you think about the concept of the information age. The purpose was for knowledge, to gain knowledge. But what he's suggesting is that the type of knowledge we're thrusting onto ourselves is basically doing more destruction than it is construction. So so hopefully you brainstorm some things that he might consider trivial in today's day and age. Imagining that he was thinking about the gold rush primarily when he's writing this piece. If we have thus desecrated ourselves, so think about the concept of desecration, almost the sacrilege, the destruction of the fane of the mind, the temple of the mind. If we have thus desecrated ourselves, as who has not? And he's including himself in that. You can see the aside with the hyphens. He's not eliminating, or he's not suggesting that he's been immune to this himself. So that adds an air of humility when otherwise he may seem to be acting almost superior to his audience. The remedy will be by wariness and devotion to reconsecrate ourselves, to rebuild ourselves, to make once more a fane of the mind, the temple of the mind. We should treat our minds, that is ourselves, as innocent and ingenuous children. This word ingenuous is important. Sometimes kids misread it as ingenious, but he's saying ingenuous, which is basically a synonym for innocence. It means harmless, innocent. So innocent and ingenuous children whose guardians we are. And be careful what objects and subjects we thrust upon their attention. Read not the times, read the eternities. This is such, I think, a universal truth. Think about the concept of the 24-hour news today, and even the notion that so much of the news that we watch is now about getting ratings more than it is delivering objective news to the population. Read not the times, read the eternities. We have this parallel drawn in the anaphoric syntax, this asyndetic but anaphoric syntax between read and read. However, the antithetical relationship between times versus eternities, eternities as universal truths, times as ephemeral truths, as truths that are fleeting, passing quickly. Both capitalized, as if one population sees the times as the Almighty, the other population sees the eternities as the Almighty, and he's distinguishing very distinctly between the two. Conventionalities, the things that are the norms, are at length as bad as impurities. Even the facts of science may dust the mind by their dryness, unless they are, in a sense, effaced each morning, softened each morning, or rather rendered fertile by the dews of fresh and living truth. So, what he's suggesting here is that the times aren't the only, the news, the mass communication isn't the only guilty party here. Even science can be considered guilty if it is not continually refreshed by living truth, the eternities, the universal timeless truths. Knowledge does not come to us by details, but in flashes of light from heaven. While that comes across as very much proselytizing, referring, to the, Christian heaven, what he's suggesting here is even a connection to Platonic theory as well. The good, that light from the good is actually what brings us truth, not the details that are cast on the cave wall. Yes, every thought that passes through the mind helps. I misspoke that. Every thought that passes through the mind helps to wear and tear it. This is continuing the metaphor. So there's an extended metaphor of this construction of a road, which is serving to destroy the natural mind, the nature of the mind, which, as in the streets of Pompeii, evince how much it has been used. this is a powerful allusion to Pompeii, which was, you may remember from world history, was destroyed by a volcano, to the extent that people were actually mummified it was instant death, and their bodies were actually mummified in the position in which they died, in very eerie, macabre photos of those mummies from Pompeii. But this evidence, it was a flourishing city before it was destroyed. And so what he's suggesting here is that, what we consider to be truth it can sometimes be ephemeral, because there are more powerful forces at work that we know not. And even in our own society today, when we consider the current situation, here we were a thriving, probably one of the healthiest economies in the history of the United States, within an instant turned upside down by the coronavirus. So something interesting to consider here. How many things there are concerning which we might well deliberate whether we had better know them, had better let their pedaling carts be driven, even at the slowest trot or walk over that bridge of glorious span which we trust to pass at last from the farthest brink of time to the nearest shore of eternity. Have we no culture? And you can see his tone. It's important here that we look at his punctuation. He's becoming far more emphatic in the way that he's speaking. If he were actually lecturing this, you could imagine his volume like a crescendo here. Have we no culture, no refinement? You can hear almost a condemnation. But skill only to live coarsely and serve the devil? This is very much the hellfire and brimstone that Thoreau was known for preaching when he would discuss society. Largely, because the question is, well, I thought he was sort of revolting against the organized religion. And in a sense he was, because what he was doing was calling out the hypocrisy. He was confused at how a Christian population could live, say, justifying actions because of a glint of gold, or the notion that you could own another person for the purpose of maintaining your own personal wealth. So these things he saw as hypocritical. So oftentimes when he used this hellfire and brimstone, he was using it to condemn the hypocrisy of a religious society. To acquire a little worldly wealth or fame or liberty and make a false show with it. See, there's where he's criticizing the hypocrisy. As if we were all husk and shell with no tender living kernel to us. And isn't it the husk and the shell that don't provide nourishment? It's the living kernel that provides the nourishment. What he's suggesting here is that none of us have it. Shall our institutions be like those chestnut burrs which contain a board of nuts, perfect only to prick the fingers? Here's that bombardment of rhetorical questions, very much like Cyrano-esque in the way that Cyrano responded to Libret, almost identical. As Dominic recognized too, this is very Ciceronian in how this is being conveyed. So my challenge to you is this: take this particular paragraph, time yourself at 40 minutes, complete a SOAPSTone thesis, and write a practice analysis of it based on just this read through that I gave you. I didn't point everything out, and I would urge you to go back and reread it yourselves. But I'm interested to see what you can do with this analysis. Hope you all are well, and talk to you soon.